This is a source for truth. This is a place of empathy. This is a place of humanity. This is a place of resistance. This is Eyes on Intel.
Welcome to Eyes on Intel. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2026. The state wants you to believe the machine is too big to break, but they only build the cages this thick because they are terrified of what happens when we realize the doors are unlocked. If you value this analysis, please consider subscribing or donating. We do not take corporate money, we do not read ads for defense contractors, and we rely entirely on your support to keep this space uncompromised and independent. We have to start today by looking at the shifting reality of the American myth. A recent AP NORC poll shows a profound realization among Asian American and Pacific Islander adults. The vast majority now agree that the United States used to be a great place for immigrants, but simply is not anymore. This is not just a shift in sentiment. This is a material awakening. The mask is slipping. The owning class has spent decades selling the illusion of a haven, a place of refuge and upward mobility, while actively engineering an extraction zone. The state does not welcome immigrants. It imports a highly exploitable labor pool, from the H-1B tech sectors to the H-2A agricultural fields. Capital demands workers, but it absolutely refuses to tolerate citizens. It strips them of their political agency and leverages the constant threat of deportation to keep wages suppressed for the entire working class. What we are seeing in this polling data is a collective recognition that the social contract is a weapon designed to extract your value and discard you the moment you demand a fair share. And that weapon is getting sharper. Look at the data war currently unfolding. Axios just reported on June 13th that ICE has been tapping directly into voter registration files in Texas and North Carolina. Let us deconstruct this immediately. This is not about election integrity. This is the merging of civic infrastructure with the deportation machine. ICE is vacuuming up voter data to cross-reference addresses, map family networks, and build a surveillance matrix that operates without warrants or public oversight. They want to weaponize your basic participation in society. If a citizen registers to vote, the state wants to know who else lives at that address. They are turning the simple act of existing in public into a vector for state violence against marginalized communities. There is a dark historical precedent here. The federal government weaponized census data during the Second World War to round up Japanese Americans. And today, they are utilizing digital fusion centers and corporate data brokers like LexisNexis to build a totalizing web of surveillance, to intimidate, to purge, and to silence. And there it is. No one should be shocked. This is the real reason for the immigration push, the real reason why families are being torn apart. The spectacle of border enforcement was never about safety. It was about building a massive, normalized occupying force, and now they are aiming it directly at the civic infrastructure of the working class. Look at the headlines rolling out from the Hill regarding the Department of Homeland Security and the upcoming midterms. Secretary Markwayne Mullin is flatly refusing to rule out the deployment of armed ICE agents to polling locations. He attempts to sanitize it with bureaucratic language, claiming they would only respond to specific threats or emergencies, but the material function is undeniable. When political operatives like Steve Bannon publicly gloat that deploying ICE to airports was merely a test run to perfect their involvement in the 2026 midterms, they are giving you the entire unvarnished playbook. They have been using the bodies of immigrants as target practice, and now they are bringing that engineered terror directly to the polls to intimidate Black, brown, and working-class voters. They know they cannot win on material policy, so they are defaulting to the threat of state violence, ensuring that the ballot box itself becomes a site of carceral anxiety. This authoritarian blueprint is boiling over into absolute hysteria within the executive branch. Look at the latest leaked demands from the vice president. The New York Times reported today, June 15th, that J.D. Vance and his inner circle are aggressively pushing to invoke the Insurrection Act to crush the unrest in Minnesota. Let us just sit with the profound absurdity of that for a moment. the Vice President of the United States, is actively begging to deploy the full lethal might of the military against the terrifying existential threat of ordinary people standing outside an ICE facility. Vance reportedly argued that it would be painful in the short term, but necessary to send a message so that these paid agitators would never again disrupt ICE operations. It is truly a marvel to witness the sheer, deadpan projection of these political cronies. Vance looks at everyday people like Mr. Pretty and Ms. Good, whom the Times explicitly noted had absolutely zero evidence of being paid by anyone, and his immediate instinct is to assume they must be on a payroll. It is a stunning self-report from a man whose entire political existence is subsidized by venture capital billionaires. True, uncompensated solidarity is the one force they cannot buy, and therefore the one force that absolutely terrifies them. Historically, the Insurrection Act has always been a tool to crush domestic labor, from the Pullman Railroad strikes of 1894 to the present day, proving the state views community resistance not as a protest, but as a direct disruption of their corporate supply chain. While they fantasize about active-duty troops on our streets, the quiet, bureaucratic violence continues behind closed doors. Look at the paper trail that recently surfaced regarding Monica Burke, the Assistant Director of Custody Management for ICE. In a nationwide memorandum dated June 24, 2025, she altered the internal rule for the maximum allowable time a human being can be kept in a temporary hold room, expanding it from 12 hours to 72 hours. Let us be absolutely clear about what a hold room is. It is a concrete box in a federal office building or a strip mall. There are no beds. There are no kitchens. There is no medical staff. These spaces were explicitly designed as temporary transit pens. When you warehouse a human being in a freezing room with continuous fluorescent lighting for 3 days, you are intentionally engineering sleep deprivation. You are utilizing biophysical breakdown to coerce them into signing away their legal rights. The state expects us to ask how an unelected assistant director can issue a waiver that so blatantly violates the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. A clear escalation of cruel and unusual punishment. But if you are looking to the Constitution to protect the marginalized, you are misreading the function of the state. The Constitution was written by property owners to protect property. When an administrator signs a waiver to lock people in a concrete room without beds for 72 hours, she is not breaking the system, she is optimizing it. This administrative enclosure matches the raw, physical terror unleashed in the fields and factories. In Washington state right now, where corporate agribusiness dictates the local economy, communities are rallying and pushing petitions just to stop a terrifying wave of unjust ICE raids. These raids are never random. They are surgical strikes against working-class solidarity. When ICE raids a Washington berry farm or an apple packing plant, they are acting as the ultimate union busters for corporate capital. Agribusiness requires vulnerable, precarious labor to maintain its massive profit margins. If the workers start to demand safety, if they start to demand fair pay, the corporation simply calls in the state to reset the labor dynamic. ICE disappears the bodies, terrorize the families left behind, and send a very clear message to every remaining worker. Keep your head down, accept the exploitation, or we will take your life away. It is class warfare. Disguised as border enforcement, the state uses these raids to fracture communities so that the owning class can continue extracting wealth without the threat of organized resistance. And when the workers inside those cages dare to organize against this nightmare, the state responds with absolute retaliation. Consider the report from the American Prospect on June 12th. The federal government just deported a prominent ICE detainee organizer directly to Ecuador. This individual was not vanished for a simple administrative violation. They were targeted for deportation because they were organizing inside the detention center. We must recognize that the modern immigration detention system is a captive labor market. Private prison corporations like CoreCivic and the Geo Group really on detainees working for $1 a day to cook the food, scrub the floors, and maintain the very facilities that cage them. The organizer who was deported was educating their fellow inmates, exposing the miserable, highly profitable conditions inside the facility, and teaching others how to map the power dynamics of their own captivity. Organized labor inside the prison industrial complex is an absolute threat to the bottom line of the private contractors running these sites. By deporting the organizer, the state hopes to amputate the movement. They use deportation as the ultimate retaliatory firing, a union-busting strike against anyone brave enough to teach others how to fight back. But the narrative of inevitable defeat is crumbling, and a profound sense of hope and solidarity is taking root at the highest institutional levels. We are witnessing a defining moment in the class war playing out across our major cities. Specifically, the latest escalation from the federal government targeting New York City. The border czar, Tom Homan, has explicitly vowed to deploy a surge of deportation agents into the 5 boroughs to turn the city into a militarized zone. But look at the national broadcast featuring New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, facing down the barrel of a federal occupation. He did not pivot to the center. He did not offer concessions or sanitize the brutality of the enforcement machine. He stood his ground and stated clearly that New York continues to be proud of being a sanctuary city, that the city is ready to stand up for its immigrant neighbors, and that they will not back down. Mamdani explicitly called ICE a rogue agency that should be abolished. When the leadership of the country's largest municipal economy utilizes its platform to reject the federal government's carceral mandate, the both sides fallacy is entirely shattered. It names the violence for exactly what it is: an occupation of working-class space. Borders, enforcement operations, and detention centers are absurd, temporary constructs. They are lines drawn by capital to convince a worker in Washington or Queens that they have nothing in common with a worker in Ecuador or Minnesota. They enforce this lie with guns, databases, and cages, but the contradictions of this system are collapsing under their own weight. The state assumes that power flows strictly from the top down, but municipal defiance proves that the machinery of extraction requires local compliance and infrastructure to function. Every localized protest against a raid, every leader who speaks up from inside a cell, and every piece of data we drag into the light proves that the machine is brittle. They can try to flood our cities, deploy their agents to the polls, or invoke the Insurrection Act, but they cannot code away the fundamental human drive for collective liberation. The machinery of fear is loud, but solidarity is structural, and a structural foundation does not break. The state can draft all the military orders it wants, but the concrete is cracking, and they do not have enough troops to hold back the tide. And as always, please remember, open hearts, open minds.